Look, I know that I said we were never gonna do this, but we're doing it. When we set up this little corner as like a mini fish room, it was only a couple months ago, but I'm pretty sure I said in that video this was as far as we were gonna take it. You know, I didn't wanna have a bunch of tanks. I really didn't wanna be consumed with like an actual fish room because I don't know, in my mind I was like, that's not what I wanna do. But I did the math and my fish tank to life ratio was just way off. Even though I have like a lot of fish tanks, you know, you're only seeing a couple in this room. I'm just having so much fun with the rice fish and doing the breeding and all this that, you know, like this starts to happen. And then I go like, I just don't have the room. I need to figure out how to make the room. I've had a fish tank real estate problem for a super long time. I need to get better at consolidating what I have and making use of what I have. This whole space isn't gonna be just like this, what you see down here, where it's gonna be a mix of actual aquascape tanks and getting back to like sort of my roots, I guess. For the sake of this video being as comprehensive as possible, I'm gonna talk now a little bit about some of the behind the scenes fish room stuff that's super relevant to the space that you choose and the way that you set things up. So if this is something that you don't wanna see, you just wanna see me set up what I set up, then I'll make the little chapter thingies down below so you can just skip this part. So, okay, if you're new to this and you wanna set up a fish room, here's my take on the whole thing. I think there are like 4, maybe 5 pillars to the whole thing that are super important. Maybe you're thinking about turning part of your garage into a fish room, or you have like a dedicated room in your house, or you have a dedicated room outside your house like I have with this little outbuilding in my backyard. Pretty much no matter where you put your fish room, you're gonna have to think about these things and make sure that most of them are taken care of. So the first one is just the temperature. So are you gonna be heating your tanks all individually with heaters, or are you gonna try and heat the room? For me, in this little outbuilding I have here, it's roughly 200 square feet. I knew that I didn't wanna do the heater thing. I didn't wanna have 30, 40, 100 watt heaters plugged in. I was on the fence for a super long time whether or not I wanted to go the mini split route. But for this room, the size of it, it's only about 200 square feet. Pretty much any mini split out there was just overkill. Like it would have been better long-term efficiency wise, but the $1,500, $2,500 upfront cost to get one set up, I just didn't want to swallow that. I knew that the walls in here were insulated kind of like a garage. I had some door issues that I had to resolve that you would kind of have to do if you were doing this in your garage, but nonetheless, it was insulated. I knew that it held heat pretty well. And I ended up finding this really cool air conditioner slash all-in-one heater. It's this LG unit. It cost me about 500 bucks and it ran really great last summer. It was able to keep the room nice and cool at around 78 degrees. And we're pretty much all the way through the winter here and it's run really good. It's been a perfect source of heat for me. It's been able to keep the room, I think I keep it at 76, 77 degrees. It was 15 outside for a few days a few weeks ago and everything was nice and toasty in here. The temperature control aspect of this whole room makes it to where I don't need to put a heater in any kind of tank unless I want to boost it up hotter because I'm doing some breeding or anything like that. So those are things to keep in mind. The temperature is really important. Again, if you are just setting up a small single shelf unit or something in your garage and you're fine with running like 6 or 7 heaters, then you can just do that. That's totally fine. Almost kind of related to temperature is humidity. So depending on how many tanks you're gonna run, your humidity can be pretty high. In this space, if I don't run a dehumidifier, my humidity, depending on the time of the year, it varies a little bit, but it'll get up to, almost 80%. That high of humidity is not good. You will grow mold in your walls and in your ceiling. You might not see it, but it'll be there and that's not good. So I run this, I don't know what brand it is. Is it also an LG? I don't know. I put stickers over the label on the front of it, but this thing runs pretty much 24/7. And it's off right now because I'm filming, but it keeps the overall humidity in here under 40%, which is actually pretty dry. There's other things you can do though to decrease the humidity. You can put lids on all of your tanks. I don't do that. That's something that I might do depending on how many more tanks I put in this room. But that is something that you're just constantly gonna battle. Like the evaporation, because you're running the dehumidifier, is gonna be higher. If you're running air in your tanks, that evaporation is gonna be higher. So that's why having a water source is really important for your fish room. That's something that I have not had in pretty much all my time of keeping fish for forever. Somehow I've managed to do it, but even in this space, like I still have to pull the hose out and drag it into the room, fill up tanks, drag it back out. It's super annoying if I want that temperature, if like I'm doing a big water change and I need that temperature to be, a specific temperature, then I have to fill up buckets and let it heat up. So either waiting for it to heat up to the ambient air temperature or, putting a heater in it to heat it up faster. So having easy access to water is also super important. So that's why in this fish room, we're setting up a little utility sink in the corner, actually right next to the big tank. It's gonna be super convenient for filling up and draining that aquarium, and I'm super pumped for it, but I still have a little bit of work to do. With this type of setup, because I'm not trying to spend a ton of money, we are gonna only have cold water to this. So we're gonna tap off of the garden hose and we're only gonna have cold water in here, which I think is still gonna be a little annoying, but it's gonna be a lot better than having to open the doors and pull the hose in and out. I'll keep you updated on that. That isn't something that gets completely finished in this video, but if you're looking to set up your fish room in your garage, you have obviously easier access to water. You can probably tap in to your water heater and have hot and cold water. So that's something to think about. You're gonna have to spend a little bit of money if you do that, but certainly not as much as running something out of your house into a different space like I'd have to do here. Another really important aspect of a fish room is how you're gonna filter your tank. So the default thing that most people do is they get a big air pump, they run PVC close to the ceiling, and they just do drop lines into each tank, which, hey, I mean, that's totally fine. That's a method that has been used for forever, and I think on most people's kind of medium to large scale fish rooms. It wasn't something that I was wild about doing, and I'm not sure with what I'm gonna be doing, it's 100% necessary, but in this video, I show you how I ran the whole airline system, and I basically just set it up to where it has an unlimited potential. So if I later decide that I want to run a bajillion tanks and I want to filter all of them, we can do it all the way across the room. So I think you'll see a little bit later how exactly we put that all together. It isn't super loud, so there's some things that we can do to quiet it up a little bit, but that is the default way that most people do it, and it's a lot better than having 50, 60 hang on back filters plugged in. I think the last important aspect of your fish room, if you're thinking about setting one up, is just how you're going to place the tanks. And I think there's maybe 3 different ways that you could do it. So the first one, I'll just pick randomly. You could go gallery style. So you could have one solid, basically a workbench that goes all along your big walls that you have. And then you just line tanks up all on that one level. Kind of in the same breath, you could have, if you're going for display tanks, you could have individual tanks with their own stands, all the prefab stuff that you get like on the rimless tanks that we have a ton of. You can sort of mix and match those together. You could decide to do all the same size tank with all the same stands and have it look really clean, kind of like a green aqua style, or like an aquarium design group, like that kind of vibe. And that was something that I really went back and forth on. But given the space that I have in here, I basically have 2 walls because this one is taken up by this ginormous tank. It wasn't gonna really give me the opportunity to do all the things that I wanted to do. So all the individual rice fish tanks, I needed pretty much to go vertical. So the only other method is to either build my own stands or get some kind of a prefab shelving unit. I decided not to build my own stands because wood is still pretty expensive. It would have been cheaper, maybe a little bit, than what I decided to do, and that we'll highlight in this video. But the other aspect of it is that I have to have exactly what I want all mapped out before I build it. So if you're not sure like what size of tanks you're gonna be using, or maybe you have a bunch of tanks already that you don't know exactly how you're gonna fit them all together, then maybe that's not the best idea, or at least it's just gonna take you a lot longer. And that's ultimately why I didn't decide to do it, because it was gonna take me a super long time to build all of the units. They're going to be pretty much stationary. There isn't a lot of flexibility. If I want to change things like drop this shelf, then I'm going to have to take screws out, not to mention get rid of the tanks. Going to have to do that anyway, but I didn't want to have to mess around with taking things apart and then putting things back together. Every time you do it, screws in, screws out, it's not going to be as good. So that leaves you with the third option, the prefab shelving units. There's a million of them. I've used cheap ones before for ones that aren't going to have super heavy tanks. But with this setup, because we're going to do a mix of smaller tanks and bigger display tanks, I needed something that was really heavy duty. So we went with the Gladiator stands. You're gonna see me put these together, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute, but they were not cheap. Probably could have saved some money there with maybe getting knockoff ones, but I went with the brand name stuff. Each shelf can hold like 2,000 pounds, so we can put big tanks on them, and it gives me that flexibility of being able to just disconnect them and move shelves and figure out things as I go. So yeah, I think that is everything that I can think of off the top of my head as I sit here in this room without the dehumidifier on. I'm getting a little sweaty. So if you have any questions, drop them down. If you skip this part, that's totally cool, but now I'm talking to you as if you did skip it, which makes no sense because you're not here. But if I hope this answered your questions. Let's move on with the actual setting up of the video and get more into the specifics on how I did all of these things that we just talked about. Everything is a complete disaster. I just, these are the things that you typically don't see, but we've made some progress. Obviously needed to do a little bit of paint work, like I have some ceiling issues that all still need to get fixed, but we have the first rack that we're gonna put into place. I think this racking system, I have a technique to make it look a little bit better, so it's not gonna be, you're not gonna be looking at like weird metal and notches and stuff. We're gonna feng shui it up a little bit here eventually, but we need to start by like putting things in places so that I can move things, so that I have room to then put more things. Not to mention we had to move the legit fish food packing operation. We actually put that inside. So I'm hoping that this system will work for me. I guess I don't know until it's all set up, but I gotta set it all up. So let's start. All right, so the Gladiator racks, we're using these for a few different reasons. One of the main reasons is because they're pretty lightweight and they're just easy to modularly change. So if we went with a wood setup here and we built them all, we'd have to know the exact dimensions of the shelves and what tanks we're going to be putting where. We'd have to have that all figured out beforehand, and I just don't have that figured out. So this means that I can snap things together and I can change things relatively easily. I don't have to pull screws in and out to change anything. There's no bolts or screwing or anything. These shelves just snap together. You can put them kind of wherever you want, and the thing is totally modular. You're going to see here in a second that we can snap like multiples of these together and make one giant thing, which is pretty cool. Each shelf also holds like an insane amount of weight, like thousands of pounds. There's these crossbars that you can put in, and I'm sure that helps the durability of the whole setup. There's also these little metal wire shelves that you can put on each one. I guess technically you don't have to, but you're gonna see why these are important in a little bit. So this whole side of the wall, we're using the 18-inch deep ones. We have 2 4-foot racks and 1 5-foot rack that's in the middle. I'm going to use the 24-inch deep racks on the other side of the room. We just had to use these 18-inchers because we don't have a lot of tolerance with the door on this side. So here you can see the modular aspect of this whole thing. There's one crossbar that's connecting all of them. Like it's not 3 separate racks that are all just right next to each other or require some kind of bolt to hold them together. It's all just one piece now. So there are some pieces of the kit that we're not using, but once we get everything kind of where we want it, then I figured I should probably use a rubber mallet to just squeeze these in. We also have to make sure that everything is level, like my floor, shocking, isn't level. So I just used a few pieces of cut wood and then a little metal piece to kind of shim it up. Probably could have done a better job of putting this all together, but we got it all level, so I think it's gonna work out just fine. The next hurdle that I faced was figuring out how to get everything as flat as possible. So we're gonna be using wood on top of the metal shelving, but these metal shelf things had this extra little bump across it that made it to where the wood was then lower in the middle than it was on the edge. Like, hopefully that's kind of easy to see, but we want to keep these metal things because it's going to make it way easier to attach our light fixtures in a little bit. So I started messing around with like, okay, if we're going to use the crossbars, then maybe we could prop some pieces of wood in there to help hold it flush. But at the same time, I was already thinking about ditching some of these on some of them so we could hide stuff up in the top of the shelf a little bit easier. So I went back and forth on this on a long time. It's one of the reasons why this video isn't out to you like 3 weeks ago. So I busted out the old Dremel, tried not to breathe in a bunch of metal shavings or get spiky metal things in my hands. So after several hours of hand grinding and wearing grinders down, having to go to Lowe's and buy more expensive grinders for this thing, finally got all of the metal shelves with this piece removed. And it turns out I was kind of right. Like, this did help a significant amount. It's still not perfect, but I'm happy with, I guess, the time that I spent to do this. One of the drawbacks, I guess, of the Gladiator racks, if you're trying to keep everything super, super flat. I guess you already just saw, but we painted some plywood black. We cut pieces to basically match the exact dimensions of those wire shelves. And so that made it pretty easy. When it came to the wood though, okay, originally I wanted to use like 3/4 inch, something really heavy duty, but sheets of that are like $90 and I was gonna need like 12 sheets. So yeah, that did not happen. We went with a super thin sheet plywood because I'm not 100% convinced that we need that much strength in the wood department. And on top of that, some of the shelves, we're going to have big tanks that are probably going to reach out to the metal parts of the rack. Like, not all of them. The smaller aquariums, I think they're going to be okay in the middle. With smaller tanks, it might be a little different depending on how many we have, but this was just a cost thing. Like, I went with the $20 sheets of whatever, like a little bit less than half an inch. I might end up regretting this. I don't know. Some of these pieces of plywood that I had to work with were a little wonky, again, because they were so cheap. Probably should have gone for something like a half an inch. Probably would have been the most cost effective and best way to do it. But this is just the way that I decided to do it. Once I had all the pieces cut though, we needed to paint it, right? And I went with black. Kind of thought maybe we should just stain these like a nice wood color, foreshadowing for a little later, but just went with some cheap black paint. Also, another thing that would have been probably a good idea would be to cover this with some kind of polyacrylic or, just something to help seal it a little bit better. From a long-term perspective, that's probably the best thing to do. But again, because I was kind of going back and forth on what wood was really going to work for me, I didn't want to put a ton of extra time and money into making this stuff bulletproof. But regardless, when all the shelves were done, I had to then figure out which shelves that I wanted to keep these little crossbars on, because if we leave them, it's going to be tough to tuck a light under. Like, you're going to be able to see it. So if I want to have that true stealth light, then I have to not have these crossbars. So that was kind of a decision that I made on the fly with certain shelves. I decided to maybe hold off on that. I put them down to the bottom because obviously I'm not going to have any tanks down there, so I don't need to hide anything, and we're just going to kind of wing it and not use them on this first one because we're not going to have a ton of weight on this. Like, this top section is going to be like the little rice fish tubs, no weight. So we're going to ditch the crossbars on there so we can tuck a light up under there. I have a bunch of these aquarium co-op lights, a bunch of 4-footers, 3-footers, so we're going to use these. I think they're probably one of the more cost-effective ways to do this, like, aside from going straight Amazon, like beamwork style, which we don't want to do. These things are relatively inexpensive. I mean, $100 to $150 is still expensive, but for what you get and like the strength of it, I'm pretty sure these would last for forever. So we're going to use these. We're going to have to get we're going to have to get a lot more of them. I was trying to figure out if we would need to have full 4-foot lights on all of these. I know the racks are 4 feet, but even a 3-foot light gets pretty good light distribution. So went back and forth on this a little bit. We'll probably just end up going with 4-footers on everything. So, oh, and we need to power these things. So went to good old Harbor Freight, got some 12 outlet cheap surge protectors for like $20 each. Got some zip ties. Hindsight 2020, should have got bigger zip ties. This took me a little bit longer than I wanted to. Would have been nice to have those, but we got those lights sucked up there as high as possible. And once we got those fired up, you can see here how invisible those things are. That's exactly what I wanted, super clean. I don't think it would look terrible if you kept the little crossbars and then you saw a little light poking down, but I just think this looks awesome. So kind of at the same time that all this was happening, I also had to do some rearranging because we had this extra piece of furniture that we could then put our dehumidifier on, and it would also serve as a box to contain our air pump, which is going to run the filtration in the room. So we got the dehumidifier plugged in, that runs outside, so it's on all the time. But here's the star of the show. This is like the air pump that I'm pretty sure everybody uses. It's like the best one ever. It's a linear piston pump. It's pretty quiet. I think that's what I'm told. We got some PVC, but we need to figure out a way to get the PVC from the pump out to all across the room. So across this side of the room, and then also over behind this tank up to the top, and then across this side. So I went back and forth on exactly how to do this. I'm using 1/2-inch PVC for our connections up to the top, and then we're going to use 3/4-inch PVC for the big pieces that make the big stretch. So once it gets up to the top of the ceiling, the main stretch is going to be 3/4 inch. And the reason for that is just to make it a little bit bigger and easier to drill our airdrops into. I don't think it really matters. You could probably do either one. this is just how I did it. So ran some PVC behind the big tank to this corner and then elbowed it up eventually. So we'll have a piece that goes up there to the top corner and then across the room there. And it's the same on the other side. So tease off, elbow. This little rubber piece comes with the pump and it has these little metal fasteners. I couldn't quite get that around it, so I eventually put something on there. But for the PVC itself, connecting it to the wall, I found these little attachments that I think are just meant for, what's the stuff called that people plumb with now? Not copper, but the plastic. It escapes me. Anyway, I hammered those into the wall. They fit the PVC perfectly, so it seemed like a good idea. I also kind of just thought that it would be a good idea to properly seal the PVC. Not 100% sure if this is a big deal, but this should prevent any air leakage. I think this is how you're supposed to do it. I'm kind of winging it here, guys, if you haven't figured it out. But that was kind of a lot of work doing it by yourself, like holding the PVC up. Ran into a couple little roadblocks, but we eventually got everything connected. And, you know, it worked out. Like nothing too crazy happened, but stretches across the top. This is the side that we're working on, that we're focused on now. We'll do the other side later, but we got the end capped off, so it should be all good. We got the other side capped off too. So if we, you know, when we get to that point of adding air, we should be good to go. But now we can finally start to move tanks over. So doing some measurements, making sure everything is going to fit. I think all my fancy little UN rimless tanks are going to be perfectly snug in this 4-foot rack. So now I'm just going to move some tanks. I'm going to shut up and let you listen to some music while I move some tanks for a little bit. All right, it's been about a week since we moved the aquariums, and I think everything is okay. Like, I wanted to just give myself a little pause here, make sure nothing weird was gonna happen with the wood, but there's no bowing or anything weird happening. Our water lines are all pretty level, not perfect, but not a visual amount that you can see. So we're good on that front. And like on this shelf that probably has the most amount of weight for right now, we don't have those middle braces because I really wanted to tuck those lights up and hide them. And so there's no issue with aquariums like this. You know, the weight distribution is gonna be mostly on the four corners, which is pretty close to the edge here. Like, yeah, the bulk of the weight is still on the wood, but I think even having just this little amount of metal here helps it a little bit, and it doesn't seem to be an issue. So we're gonna press on now. Still gotta rig a light up for this top portion so I can have my rice fish tubs up here, and then we can finally start to run some air, because like obviously these tanks have been without it for about a week, and nothing weird has happened with the cycle getting disrupted or anything. And I think once we plug those back in, everything will just resume as normal. No big deal. Unfortunately, we can't just hot glue airline into PVC, so we're gonna have to use these little connectors, and we're gonna have to drill some holes in the tube. So I just found a drill bit. I can't remember what size it is, but it fits the end of this thing perfectly. We then pop those little valves into the drill and then use that to screw them in place. I tried to do it by hand and it was basically impossible. So I just tried to space these out as evenly as possible, basically to the center of each tank that it's going to run into. And then I tried to just do this as slow and gentle as possible. I, read some stuff online, watched some videos that you don't want to over drill them. So once I did the first one and kind of did that, I then slowed it down and tried to screw them in basically almost all the way, and then just finished them off with a little wrench. So hopefully that we don't have any leaks. I didn't use any Teflon tape or anything on these because, I don't know, they're just super tiny and it didn't seem like it would be 100% necessary. But again, kind of almost winging it here. I was lucky in that I had this giant spool of airline tubing that I stole from Gory like a million years ago. So we ended up using that stuff. It's this really soft, pliable airline tubing that also duals as a CO2 line, which is kind of interesting. I don't know, it must be made out of magic. But we just plug that into all of our also co-op sponge filters that we have down here. We're using the little nano ones. And again, we might convert this and use the air lifts at some point. But yeah, we just plugged them in, tried to measure the lines, tried to get them perfect, but it was kind of tough. We'll fix these later. But I almost forgot, we have more than 5 tanks, so we need to run more than 5 lines if we want to get air to everything. I'll probably just end up putting an additional valve for the bottom tanks right next to these and just run the tubes down parallel to them. As far as the rice fish tubs on top, don't think we're really going to run air to those. It's not really necessary, so I don't know. If we want to, we can, and that's the beauty of this whole system. So I guess now technically we could turn the air on. I'm a little nervous because we only have like the 5 lines, and I just feel like because that pump is so strong, it's just gonna bubble up these things like crazy, and I'm gonna have to turn it off anyway. But I don't know, I feel like we have to just like try it and then see what happens. Like everything is plumbed up. There's a point over here, which, we haven't gotten to this part of the room. That's just like, it's not completely sealed. I took a little rubber mallet and hammered in a cap. So I don't know, maybe that'll shoot across the room. Hopefully not. I guess we just plug it in and see what happens over there, and then maybe I'll have to run across the room and like close the valves a little bit, but they're all wide open right now. Maybe I should probably just close them halfway now. Okay, here goes nothing. Okay, it's loud, but it's not it's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Why isn't that one working? Maybe I closed them too much? Okay. To figure out how this whole thing works, but I don't know, if we open this one, I can hear hissing, and then that's going like a ton now. Let's try this one. Open that guy up, open that guy up. Okay, so, I mean, fine-tuning this stuff is gonna be challenging. Obviously, it's not running super great. Let's try and dial all these back. That one's, I don't know, maybe I over-tightened some of these to where they're like, a little bit like they're leaking out. I don't know, because I screwed them on too tight. That seems to be doing a little bit better. Still like kind of crazy over there. Not coming out at all over here. So, I don't know. I think these knobs up here are just a little finicky. Like, you really have to get up there and get the sweet spot to find like where it's gonna put out the right amount of bubbles for you. So, I don't know. I'll have to just kind of mess around with that for a little while and figure it out. I just don't want it to be like super loud in here, but luckily this pump is super quiet. Like, it is probably half as loud as the dehumidifier, which is turned off right now. But yeah, I mean, I'm So far, happy with this. I was worried maybe we'd have to put some sound deadening stuff in here, but with the door closed, I think we're not even gonna be able to hear that this thing is on. The air back there is infinitely more loud, so it's gonna be like fine-tuning the air on those sponge filters, and probably like Corey has those new like jet lift things for the sponge filters, and I think those help a lot with the sound. As long as you can get them at the right height to match with the water level, then I think it kind of like makes them silent. So I'm gonna have to ask him about those things, because I don't know, that bubbling, I don't know if you can hear it now, but it's pretty loud, not what I want. Besides the air noise, the other thing about this whole setup that I was a little concerned about was just how like industrial it looked with the rack. And so maybe you already saw it, or you saw some of the spoilers. I think I want to cover the whole outside face of this with like a more natural wood. So that's kind of the last piece of this whole puzzle that I'm gonna work on now. And I think the end result is gonna be something that's pretty cool. All right, let's finish this thing off, make it look a little bit better. As much as I love staring at this Gladiator logo, I don't. So I have a bunch of wood left over. This is actually trim that I used on the shed this summer to help fix it up. So I had some of this left over. I started playing around with it. I hadn't gotten to like coloring the wood or staining it yet. Spoiler alert, but I was trying to figure out the best way to attach these. So I have a bunch of rare earth magnets. This is all leftover stuff that I've had for a super long time. I'm trying to use as much of that as I can. So put some magnets on there. The boards would stay up like the horizontal boards, but they would sag really quickly. And so that was kind of annoying. Trying to take advantage of the fact that we have a metal rack here and use as many, magnetized things as possible, but that wasn't going to quite cut it. I thought maybe the vertical ones, it would be just fine though, because, it doesn't have to support any weight. It's going to be sitting on the ground, the bottom part. So that actually turned out to be a good method for that. Still need to figure out what to do with the horizontal boards though. So I got some double-sided like mounting tape, and I figured like, hey, if this stuff is sticky enough, we should be able to just stick these on, and then we don't have to worry about like screwing anything into the rack. And it turned out that that was a viable method. Like they weren't falling off, the tape was good enough. So with that in mind, it was time to then just take these boards in and get them stained. Got all my boards laid out. I had to buy a couple new ones. These older ones have been outside and they're a little seasoned up. I sanded them, and it turns out they took the stain better than the new boards did. And so I don't know, moving forward and finishing this project, I'm not sure if it's going to look all cohesive, but I think it should be fairly good. And don't forget, if you're going to be staining stuff, put a cloth down because you are going to knock that thing over and get it all over your garage floor. This video is so out of order. I don't know what happened to the rice fish tubs, but we're going to go ahead and put those back. And now we can just take our freshly stained, nice Chester English chestnut stained boards and put them into place. So actually, I put a few more magnets. I don't know why I was just so hung up on the magnet thing. I just really wanted it to work. We got the bottom board with like 6 magnets on it. That one worked, but we had to struggle through the mounting tape and taking the second piece of the wrapper off of it for the rest of them. And eventually we got everything on there. And I think the end result is pretty good. I mean, I'm still kind of messing around with stuff. We'll see if these all stick and hold for the long term. But right now, it's been a couple days and everything is still in place. So that makes me happy. I'm happy with the result. I think this looks infinitely better than just leaving it the industrial kind of like Gladiator style with the notches in there. I just think this brings it all together. And that is my take on a fish room. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So there it is. There's the first installation of the proper fish room setup over here. There's still like an infinite amount of work to do. It's a little overwhelming still, but I'm really stoked to get this first portion of it done. And then we have like a framework for how everything else is supposed to be. So stoked on that. I might not, I might not look like it because I'm super tired. But I hope, you had fun, like, hanging out, learning some stuff with me as I did this. Like, this isn't meant to be a video that's like, here's how you should exactly do this. This is kind of a weird hybrid video of like, hey, let's learn some stuff together. So I hope it still served a purpose. You still maybe learned something that I was able to pull out from all the people that I talked to about setting this up, and using hopefully like all of the best ideas that I came up with. Like, it's been a lot. I think, there's definitely a better way to do a lot of the things that I did today, but I hope you had fun at least watching me do it. Yeah, I'm excited to finally get this thing done, and hopefully we can get it done in a reasonable amount of time. I'm not sure what next week's video is, if it's going to be related to this or not, I kind of do everything on the fly these days. That just seems to work the best for me, for better or worse. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.